Leave. Right now. The words weren't shouted. They didn't have to be. Every conversation in the ballroom stopped the moment my wife said them. For a second, I honestly thought she was joking. Then she stepped closer, looked me straight in the eyes, and smiled. Not the smile I'd fallen in love with 6 years earlier. This one was cold, calculated, like she'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She slipped her hand into another man's hand and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "You heard me. You're embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing me." A few people laughed. Someone whispered. I didn't even know she was married. The man standing beside her chuckled, wrapped an arm around her waist, and looked at me like I was nothing more than a stranger who had wandered into the wrong room. Then he nodded toward two security guards. "Escort him out," he said. "He's no longer welcome here." One of the guards walked over with an apologetic look on his face. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." I looked around the ballroom. Not one person spoke up. Not one. Some avoided eye contact. Others pulled out their phones. A few were actually smiling. It wasn't just humiliation. It was entertainment. My wife folded her arms and quietly said, "You should have accepted that your time was over." I could have stopped everything with a single sentence. Just one. Instead, I nodded. I thanked the security guard for doing his job, and I walked toward the exit. That was the moment everyone in the room believed they had won. What none of them knew. Not my wife. Not the man standing beside her. Not the executives laughing into their champagne glasses. Not even the chairman standing near the stage. Was that every major decision made inside Crestmont Technologies required one signature before it became official. Mine. But that isn't the part of this story that still keeps me awake at night. The real question isn't why they tried to throw me out. It's why I allowed them to humiliate me in front of hundreds of people without saying a single word. Because if I had spoken even 30 seconds earlier, none of what happened next would have unfolded the way it did. To understand why I stayed silent that night, we have to go back 6 years. To a promise I made after the first woman I ever loved walked away the moment she believed I'd lost everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. 6 years earlier, if someone had told me the woman standing beside me would one day have me thrown out of a room full of strangers, I would have laughed in their face. Because the Vanessa I married wasn't cruel. She wasn't arrogant. She wasn't the kind of woman who cared about titles or expensive cars. At least, that's what I believed. We met on a rainy Tuesday afternoon at a neighborhood bookstore in Chicago. I'd stopped in after a meeting downtown, looking for a biography I'd been meaning to read for months. She was standing on a small ladder, trying to reach a book on the top shelf. Just as I walked past, the stack she was holding slipped from her arms. Books scattered everywhere. Without thinking, I knelt down and started picking them up. She laughed. "Well, this is embarrassing." "It happens," I said, handing her the last book. She smiled. "Thank you." Most people would have walked right past me. Looking back now, that sentence should have stayed with me longer than it did. Because over the years, I would learn that people often tell you exactly who they are, if you're paying attention. Our first date wasn't at some expensive steakhouse. It was at a small family-owned diner that served the best homemade apple pie I'd ever tasted. Vanessa spent more time talking about her parents than herself. She told me how hard they had worked, how they'd sacrificed everything to give her opportunities they never had. She said she admired honest people, people with integrity, people who never forgot where they came from. I remember thinking, she's exactly the kind of person I've been praying to meet. After what happened with Rachel, I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for peace. Someone who loved the man. Not the resume, not the bank account, just the man. And for a while, Vanessa made me believe I'd finally found that. The truth is, there were parts of my life I never shared with her. Not because I wanted to deceive her, because I'd made myself a promise years earlier. A promise I had never broken. 8 years before I met Vanessa, the woman I'd planned to marry walked away within a week of believing I'd lost everything. The investment I'd backed recovered months later. But she never came back. That experience changed me more than I realized. From that day forward, I decided that anyone who wanted to be part of my life would have to know me without knowing my wealth. No luxury watches, no exotic cars, no private clubs, no conversations about investments. No family connections. The trust that managed my family's fortune stayed completely separate from my everyday life. Officially, I worked as a business strategy consultant, which wasn't a lie. I simply never explained who my clients really were, or that my signature quietly influenced companies worth billions of dollars. Money has an unusual way of introducing doubt into every relationship. I wanted certainty. I wanted someone to choose me. Before they knew what I had, Vanessa never questioned my modest apartment. She never asked why I drove a 6-year-old sedan instead of something flashy. In fact, she'd often smile and say, "I love that you're not obsessed with showing off like everyone else." Every time she said it, I felt more certain I'd made the right choice. We married 18 months later. It wasn't extravagant. 42 guests, a small stone chapel, fresh flowers from a local florist, a jazz trio instead of a full orchestra. Our honeymoon was a quiet week on the coast of Maine, where we spent more time walking along the shoreline than taking pictures. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. Sometimes I wonder if they were just as real for her as they were for me, or if I was the only one living inside that memory. The first warning sign didn't come with shouting, or betrayal, or another man. It came during a dinner party almost 2 years into our marriage. We'd been invited to the home of one of her co-workers. Everyone spent the evening talking about promotions, luxury vacations, vacation homes, and expensive renovations. One couple had just bought a house worth nearly $2 million. Another guest proudly announced he'd ordered a brand new imported sports car. Vanessa laughed along with everyone else. But on the drive home, she became unusually quiet. Finally, she looked out the passenger window and asked, "Do you ever feel like we're falling behind?" The question caught me off guard. "Behind who?" I asked. "Everyone." She gave a small shrug. "Sometimes I wonder if we're dreaming too small." I reached over and squeezed her hand. "Success isn't a race, Vanessa." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That was the first time I noticed something I couldn't quite explain. It lasted only a few seconds. Then it disappeared. At least, I thought it had. Looking back now, that quiet drive home was the moment the foundation of our marriage began to crack. I just didn't know it yet. And within the next year, someone would enter our lives who knew exactly how to widen those cracks until everything we'd built came crashing down. His name was Damian Brooks. The first time I met him, he shook my hand with the kind of confidence that only comes from people who've spent their entire lives believing every room belongs to them. He was Vanessa's new regional director. Tall, perfectly tailored suits, a smile polished enough to belong on a billboard. He remembered everyone's name after meeting them once, tipped waiters generously when people were watching, and had a habit of making every conversation sound like an opportunity. People were naturally drawn to him, including my wife. At first, I didn't think much of it. Vanessa came home talking about how brilliant he was. "You should hear him speak," she'd say while setting the dinner table. "He makes everyone feel like they can accomplish anything." I'd smile and ask about her day. She'd tell me about a new project Damien had assigned her, how he'd praised her presentation during a meeting, how he believed she had leadership potential. I was proud of her. She had worked hard for every promotion she'd earned, and I genuinely thought she'd found a boss who recognized her talent. If anything, I was grateful. Everyone deserves someone who believes in them. Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to how often his name came up. A few months later, Vanessa started staying late at the office. At first, it was once a week, then twice. Soon, it became almost every evening. She always had an explanation. Quarter-end reports, client presentations. Damien asked me to help prepare tomorrow's meeting. None of it sounded unreasonable. After all, I'd spent years working long hours myself. Trust isn't built by questioning every late night. It's built by believing the person you love is telling the truth. So I believed her. One Friday evening, I decided to surprise her. She'd mentioned having another late meeting, so I stopped by her favorite Italian restaurant and picked up takeout from the little place where we'd celebrated our first wedding anniversary. Chicken parmesan for her, baked lasagna for me, a slice of tiramisu to share. The owner smiled when he saw me. "Special occasion?" he asked. "Just thought she'd appreciate dinner after a long day," I replied. He nodded. "She's a lucky woman." I smiled all the way to her office building. That smile disappeared the moment I walked into the lobby. The receptionist looked confused. "Can I help you?" I'm here to surprise my wife, Vanessa Hart. She said she's still working. The receptionist frowned and glanced toward the nearly empty office floor. That's strange, she said quietly. Most of the staff left almost an hour ago. I felt my stomach tighten. Maybe she's upstairs? She checked the system, then shook her head. No, her access badge shows she left at 5:42. I looked at the clock. It was almost 7. For a moment, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she'd gone to meet a client. Maybe she'd forgotten to call. Maybe her phone had died. Our minds will invent 100 comforting stories before accepting one painful truth. I thanked the receptionist and walked back to my car. The takeout containers beside me were still warm. By the time I reached home, they weren't. Vanessa arrived nearly an hour later. She walked in carrying her laptop bag, kicked off her shoes, and smiled as though nothing was unusual. "You're still awake?" she asked. I looked at the untouched dinner sitting on the kitchen table. "I thought you were working late." She froze, just for a second. Then she laughed softly. Plans changed. Damien ended the meeting early, and a few of us grabbed coffee afterward. It sounded believable, almost too believable. "You could have called," I said. "I know." She kissed my cheek. "I'm sorry. My phone was in my bag the whole time." I wanted to believe her. So I did. That's the dangerous thing about love. Sometimes trust isn't earned. It's chosen, even when the evidence is trying to tell you otherwise. A week later, something happened that should have shattered that trust completely. Vanessa was in the shower when her phone buzzed on the bathroom counter. Normally, I would have ignored it. I had never gone through her phone. Never wanted to. But the screen lit up with a message preview before it went dark again. It wasn't the words that caught my attention. It was the sender, Damien. Without thinking, I glanced at the notification. It read, "Tonight was perfect. Can't stop thinking about your smile." My heart stopped. I stared at the screen, convinced I'd misunderstood. Maybe it was meant for someone else. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe there was an explanation I simply couldn't see. The shower turned off. I quickly looked away and stepped back into the hallway just as Vanessa opened the bathroom door. She smiled at me, the same warm smile I'd trusted for years. "Everything okay?" she asked. For a long moment, I couldn't answer, because I had just realized something that terrified me. The biggest betrayals don't begin the day you discover them. They begin the day someone decides you're unlikely to question them. And I was about to learn just how long I had been living inside a carefully constructed lie. I didn't confront Vanessa about the message. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even the following week. People like to believe they demand answers immediately. That they'd slam the phone down on the table and say, "Explain this." But when your entire life is wrapped around someone, you don't go looking for proof they're destroying it. You search for reasons to believe they aren't. So I convinced myself the text could mean anything. Maybe Damien had been drinking. Maybe he crossed a professional line, and Vanessa hadn't encouraged it. Maybe I was letting my imagination run wild. Hope has a strange way of disguising itself as denial. The following Saturday, Vanessa suggested we spend the afternoon together. We drove to a local farmer's market, bought fresh peaches, sampled homemade jams, and laughed over a street musician who kept forgetting the lyrics to classic songs. For a few hours, everything felt normal again. She slipped her arm through mine as we walked. She rested her head on my shoulder while we sat on a park bench sharing a cup of coffee. If someone had taken a picture of us that afternoon, they would have seen a happy couple. They would have never guessed that one unanswered text message was sitting like a crack beneath the surface of every smile. When we got home, Vanessa hugged me tightly. "I know I've been distracted lately," she whispered. "Work has just been overwhelming." I kissed the top of her head. "We'll get through it." Those words still haunt me, because I meant every one of them. The following Monday, my phone rang just after lunch. The number wasn't saved in my contacts. "Mr. Hart." "Yes. This is Melissa from Evergreen Community Bank. I'm calling to verify a recent request regarding your joint savings account." I frowned. "What request?" There was a brief silence. "Your wife submitted paperwork this morning asking to increase the daily transfer limit on the account." I stopped typing. "She did what?" "I just need confirmation from both account holders before we process the change." I thanked her and ended the call. The request itself wasn't unusual. What bothered me was that Vanessa hadn't mentioned it. We'd always discussed financial decisions together. Always. That was one of the promises we'd made before getting married. No surprises. No hidden debts. No secret accounts. Complete honesty. At least, that had been the agreement. That evening, I casually brought it up over dinner. The bank called today. Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Oh, they said you wanted to increase the transfer limit on our savings account. Her expression changed so quickly that most people would have missed it. Surprise, then concern, then a perfectly practiced smile. Oh, that. She laughed softly. I completely forgot to tell you. Why did you need to change it? Jessica from work is buying a condo, and I was thinking about lending her some money for the down payment if she came up short. It sounded generous. Almost too generous. How much? Nothing's decided, she replied quickly. It was just something I was considering. I nodded, but something inside me wouldn't settle. Vanessa had always been thoughtful, careful. She wouldn't make financial promises without talking to me first. At least, she never used to. That night, long after she'd fallen asleep, I sat alone on our back porch. The summer air was warm, but I couldn't stop shivering. My phone buzzed. It was a message from an old friend named Daniel. Daniel wasn't just a friend. He'd spent nearly 20 years investigating corporate fraud before retiring from the FBI. He'd become the kind of man who noticed details most people overlooked. Earlier that afternoon, I texted him a simple question. Am I overthinking something? His reply came a few minutes later. Call me. When I did, he didn't waste time. Tell me exactly what's going on. I explained everything. The late nights. The text message. The bank call. The sudden changes in Vanessa's behavior. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. Michael, maybe it's nothing. I let out a relieved breath. Then he continued. But if your instincts are screaming at you, don't silence them just because you're afraid of what they might be saying. Those words stayed with me. So what do? I asked. You don't accuse. His voice remained calm. You observe. People who are lying usually expose themselves eventually. Not because they're careless. Because keeping multiple lies alive is exhausting. I thanked him and hung up. For the first time in weeks, I stopped trying to explain away what I was seeing. Instead, I started paying attention. It didn't take long before the pieces began falling into place. Vanessa started protecting her phone in ways she never had before. If it buzzed, she'd flip it over immediately. If she left the room, it went with her. She changed the passcode we'd shared since our honeymoon. When I asked about it, she smiled. The company updated its security policy. Reasonable. Except, her personal phone had changed too. Then came the business trips. One overnight conference became two. Two became four. She started buying new dresses she'd never worn around me. New perfume. New jewelry. When I complimented her one evening, she seemed almost startled. Oh, this? She said, touching the necklace around her neck. It was a gift from the team for finishing the Henderson project. I smiled. But inside, I felt something quietly breaking. Because I'd met her entire team, and not one of them had ever given anyone gifts. Especially not diamond necklaces. Still, I said nothing. Not because I was weak, but because I needed to know whether I was losing my marriage, or simply losing my trust. I didn't realize then that the truth was even worse. Because while I was trying to save our relationship, someone else was already making plans to erase me from every part of her future. There's a strange moment that comes after your heart has been broken, but before you've admitted it to yourself. You stop looking for the truth. Instead, you start noticing it. It's everywhere. In the conversations that suddenly end when you walk into the room. In the excuses that sound just a little too polished. In the smiles that arrive half a second too late. That's where I found myself. Not searching. Simply observing. And once I did, I couldn't stop seeing what had been right in front of me all along. 3 weeks after Daniel and I spoke, Vanessa announced she had another overnight conference. This one was in Milwaukee. It's mandatory, she said while packing a navy blue suitcase. Damien wants the entire management team there. I nodded. Drive safely. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. I'll be home tomorrow night. Then she was gone. I watched her car disappear down the street before walking back inside the house. The silence felt different now. Not peaceful. Suspicious. For the first time in our marriage, I found myself wondering whether she was actually where she claimed to be. That thought made me feel ashamed. Not because it was unreasonable, but because I had become the kind of husband who questioned everything. The next morning, I had a breakfast meeting downtown with one of my consulting clients. As I left the restaurant, my phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. She sent a picture of a hotel window overlooking a parking lot. Long day ahead. Wish you were here. Most husbands would have smiled. I almost did. Then something caught my attention. Reflected in the corner of the window was part of a building across the street. It looked familiar. Very familiar. I enlarged the photo, then enlarged it again. My stomach tightened. The reflection wasn't from Milwaukee. It was from downtown Chicago, less than 20 minutes from where I was standing. I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe the picture was old. Maybe she'd accidentally sent one from a previous trip. Maybe. But there was today's newspaper sitting on the desk beneath the window. The date was impossible to ignore. She wasn't out of town. She had lied. I didn't call her. I didn't text. Instead, I walked to my car and sat there for nearly 10 minutes, staring through the windshield. Sometimes the hardest part isn't discovering someone lied. It's realizing how effortlessly they did it. How naturally. How often. That evening, Vanessa returned home carrying a gift bag. "Look what they gave everyone at the conference," she said cheerfully, pulling out a branded coffee mug and a notebook. She talked about keynote speakers, networking sessions, a leadership workshop. She described the hotel restaurant in remarkable detail. She even complained about the uncomfortable beds. Every word sounded convincing. Except, none of it had happened. I listened without interrupting. Every lie she told built another wall between us. When she finally asked, "Why are you looking at me like that?" I smiled. Just tired. It was the first lie I'd ever told my wife. And somehow, it hurt more than hers. Over the next few days, another change became impossible to ignore. Vanessa started receiving deliveries at the office instead of our home. Designer clothing, luxury handbags, shoes that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Whenever I complimented something new, she'd laugh. Employee discount, clearance sale, reward points. There was always an answer. Always. But none of the answers fit the life we'd built together. I knew exactly how much we earned. Even with her recent promotion, these purchases didn't make sense. Not unless someone else was paying for them. That possibility sat in the back of my mind like a storm cloud I refused to look directly at. A week later, Daniel invited me to lunch. He studied me for a long moment before saying, "You look exhausted." I laughed quietly. "I don't think I've slept through the night in over a month." He stirred his coffee. "Have you confronted her?" I shook my head. "Not yet." "Why?" I looked out the restaurant window. "Because once I ask the question, our marriage will never be the same." Daniel nodded slowly. "You're right." Then he leaned forward. "But neither will it stay the same if you keep pretending nothing's wrong." He reached into his briefcase and slid a small notebook across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Write everything down. Every date. Every conversation. Every inconsistency." I frowned. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked me directly in the eyes. "Because memories become emotional. Facts don't." I took the notebook home that afternoon. I had no idea it would become one of the most important decisions I'd ever make. As the days passed, the pages filled quickly. Late meetings that didn't exist. Business trips that couldn't be verified. Unexplained deposits into our joint account. Large withdrawals that disappeared just as fast. Receipts from restaurants we'd never visited together. One lie by itself looked harmless. 10 lies looked unfortunate. But dozens of carefully connected lies formed a pattern. And patterns tell stories people don't want you to read. Still, there was one question I couldn't answer. Why? If Vanessa wanted to leave, why didn't she simply leave? Why continue pretending? Why come home every night? Why tell me she loved me? That answer arrived on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, when I stopped by her office to return something she'd accidentally left at home. What I overheard outside a conference room door changed everything I thought I knew. Not because it confirmed my worst fears, but because it revealed that this had never been just about an affair. It was about something much bigger, something that had been carefully planned. Long before I ever realized I was part of the game. I never intended to confront Vanessa that Thursday. I only wanted to return the leather portfolio she'd forgotten on the kitchen counter. She had an important presentation that afternoon, and despite everything that had happened, part of me still wanted to help her. Old habits don't disappear overnight. especially when they're built on years of love. I walked into the lobby of Crestmont Technologies just after 2 o'clock. The receptionist smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I just need to drop something off for my wife." She nodded toward the elevators. "Conference room B. The executive team is meeting in there." I thanked her and made my way down the hallway. The conference room door was almost completely closed. Just before I reached it, I heard Damien's voice. "Another few months," he said. "Then everything falls into place." I stopped, not because I was trying to eavesdrop, but because I heard my name. "Michael still doesn't suspect anything," Vanessa replied. There was laughter inside the room. Then Damien spoke again. "Good. As long as he keeps believing you're happily married, there won't be any messy surprises before the gala." The gala. The same gala where I'd later be thrown out. At that moment, I had no idea why that event mattered so much. But I knew one thing. They weren't simply hiding an affair. They were planning something. Something that involved me. I stood there for several seconds, unable to move. Every instinct told me to burst through that door. To demand answers. To ask how two people I'd trusted could speak about my life as though I were nothing more than a problem waiting to be solved. Instead, I quietly placed the portfolio on a nearby reception desk, turned around, and walked back to my car. People often mistake self-control for weakness. They couldn't be more wrong. Anger wants immediate satisfaction. Wisdom waits. That evening, I called Daniel. I didn't need advice anymore. I needed perspective. When I finished explaining everything I'd overheard, he remained silent for a long time. Finally, he asked, "Michael, who benefits if your marriage ends publicly?" The question caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Think beyond the relationship." I leaned back in my chair. "Vanessa would." "Who else?" I closed my eyes. Then something clicked. Not completely, just enough to make me uncomfortable. Damien. Somehow, Damien also stood to gain. I just couldn't see how. Not yet. The following weeks became the strangest of my life. I stopped reacting, stopped questioning, stopped arguing. Instead, I watched. Vanessa seemed almost relieved. She laughed more. She talked about future vacations. She even suggested we renovate the kitchen before Christmas. It was as if she'd convinced herself I'd never discover the truth. Sometimes she'd reach across the couch, hold my hand, and ask, "We're okay, aren't we?" I'd smile gently. Of course. Those words tasted bitter every time I said them. Not because they were lies, because they were goodbye. She just didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, I quietly began preparing for the annual leadership gala, not as Vanessa's husband. As someone with responsibilities few people inside the company understood. Every quarter, I received confidential reports, board recommendations, financial summaries, long-term strategic plans. Most people assumed those documents went directly to the chairman. They didn't. They came to me first. I reviewed every page with unusual care that year. Not because I was looking for revenge, because I needed to understand whether whatever Damien and Vanessa were planning reached beyond my marriage. The more I read, the more concerned I became. There were proposals being pushed unusually fast. Vendor contracts approved without proper review. Executive expense reports that didn't add up. Large consulting payments flowing to companies I'd never heard of. Individually, none of it proved wrongdoing. Together, it painted a picture that made me deeply uneasy. For the first time, I began to wonder if Damien's interest in Vanessa had never been personal at all. Perhaps, she had simply become useful. The night of the gala finally arrived. The Grand Windsor Ballroom had been transformed into something extraordinary. Crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors. A string quartet played softly near the stage. Hundreds of executives, investors, community leaders, and board members filled the room. Vanessa looked stunning in a midnight blue gown. As we entered, dozens of people greeted her by name. She smiled effortlessly, confident, admired, completely at ease. No one paid much attention to me. That wasn't unusual. I preferred it that way. I wore a simple black tuxedo I'd owned for years. No designer labels. No flashy watch. Nothing that attracted attention. Exactly the way I'd always chosen to live. Vanessa leaned close and quietly said, "Try not to embarrass me tonight." The words landed harder than she probably intended. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd shared birthdays with. Christmas mornings. Hospital visits. Dreams. Plans for growing old together. For just a brief moment, I searched her face for the woman I'd fallen in love with. I couldn't find her. Then Damien appeared beside us, holding a glass of champagne. He smiled warmly, but there was something rehearsed about it. "Michael," he said, "glad you could make it." I smiled politely. "Wouldn't miss it." He raised his glass. "Enjoy the evening." His eyes lingered on me for a second longer than necessary, almost as if he were making sure I still didn't understand the role they'd written for me. I wished, in that moment, that I could tell him how wrong he was. But some victories lose their power if they're rushed. So I remained silent, exactly as they'd expected, because the most powerful move wasn't exposing the truth before everyone had taken their seats. It was allowing every person responsible to believe their plan had succeeded, right until the moment it collapsed beneath them. The ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage as the chairman of Crestmont Technologies stepped to the podium. The conversations faded. Champagne glasses were set down. Nearly 400 people turned their attention toward the front of the room. Vanessa leaned toward Damien with a confident smile. Neither of them even looked in my direction. The chairman welcomed everyone, thanked the company's employees for another successful year, and recognized several department leaders for their achievements. Then he paused. He unfolded a single sheet of paper. "I'd like to take a moment," he said, "to recognize someone whose contributions to this company have never been made from behind a microphone, but from behind every major decision that has shaped our future." I noticed Damien straighten his jacket. Vanessa smiled proudly at him. They were convinced his name was about to be called. Then the chairman continued. "For years, this individual has deliberately avoided public recognition. In fact, many people in this room have never even met him." A few people glanced around curiously. "Tonight," he said, "I'm pleased to introduce the majority shareholder, chairman of the executive trust, and the man whose vision helped build Crestmont Technologies into what it is today." He looked directly toward the back of the ballroom. "Michael Hart." For a heartbeat, the room went completely silent. It wasn't the polite silence of a formal event. It was the silence of hundreds of people realizing they had misunderstood everything. Every head slowly turned toward me. I could almost hear the confusion spreading through the room. "Michael, that can't be right. Isn't that Vanessa's husband? I thought he was a consultant." The chairman smiled warmly. "Michael, would you join me on stage?" I handed my untouched glass of sparkling water to a passing server, smoothed the front of my tuxedo, then calmly walked forward. No rush. No anger, no smile, just quiet certainty. As I passed the tables, I saw faces I'd never forget. Executives who had laughed as security approached me, managers who had looked away, guests who had whispered behind their hands. The same security guard who had been ordered to escort me out stood frozen near the entrance. When our eyes met, he looked embarrassed. I simply gave him a small nod. He had only been doing his job. My anger had never been directed at him. I stepped onto the stage. The chairman shook my hand firmly. "Thank you for finally allowing us to recognize you publicly," he said. I smiled. It seemed like the right time. He handed me the microphone. For several seconds, I said nothing. Silence has a remarkable way of making people confront their own thoughts. Finally, I spoke. "Good evening, everyone." My voice echoed through the ballroom. "Many of you have spent years working alongside me without realizing who I was." A few nervous laughs broke the silence. That wasn't an accident. I've always believed that respect should be earned through character, not through titles. My eyes slowly moved across the room. They stopped on Vanessa. She had gone completely pale. The confident smile she'd worn only moments earlier had vanished. Beside her, Damien looked as though he couldn't decide whether to sit down or leave. Neither option would save him. "Tonight," I continued, "I was reminded how quickly people reveal themselves when they believe someone has nothing to offer them." The room became even quieter. Some judged me by the watch I wore. Some judged me by the car I drove. Some judged me because they assumed they knew my worth. I paused. They were all wrong. Before I could continue, the chairman stepped beside me. "There's one more announcement." He looked toward the board members seated near the front. "Earlier this afternoon, after an internal review requested by Mr. Hart several weeks ago, the board voted unanimously to begin a formal investigation into multiple executive irregularities involving unauthorized vendor contracts, financial misconduct, and violations of company ethics. The room erupted into whispers. I never took my eyes off Damien. The chairman continued. Effective immediately, Damian Brooks has been relieved of all executive responsibilities pending the outcome of that investigation. Damien's face lost all color. He opened his mouth as if to argue. No words came out. Two members of the company's legal team quietly approached his table. Not dramatically, not aggressively, professionally, the same way accountability usually arrives. Then the chairman looked toward Vanessa. Mrs. Hart has also been placed on administrative leave pending review of her involvement in those matters. Vanessa stood abruptly. Michael. It was the first word she'd spoken to me all evening. Her voice trembled. Please, this isn't what you think. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I answered quietly. No, it's exactly what I think. There was no anger left in my voice. Only sadness. The hardest part wasn't losing my marriage. It was realizing I'd already lost it long before tonight. Tears filled her eyes. For a second, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd once loved. Then it disappeared beneath the weight of the choices she'd made. A few weeks later, I signed the divorce papers. Not because I hated Vanessa, because I finally loved myself enough to stop accepting less than honesty. The company's investigation uncovered millions of dollars in fraudulent contracts orchestrated by Damien and several outside vendors. Vanessa hadn't created the scheme, but she had knowingly helped conceal it. Her career ended the same day his did. As for me, I returned to the quiet life I'd always preferred. No interviews, no magazine covers, no victory speeches, just the peace that comes from knowing the truth never needs to shout. It only needs time. If that night taught me anything, it's this. Never measure someone's worth by what they wear, where they sit, or what title appears on their business card. Character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed by how you treat people when you believe they can do absolutely nothing for you. Because fortunes can change, positions can disappear, power can shift overnight. But the way you treat another human being, that follows you long after the applause has ended. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated or judged by appearances, only for the truth to come out later? I'd love to read your story. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes kindness is never a weakness. Until next time, thank you for watching.